Sure. Let me remind all of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate the bodhicitta motivation, that is the altruistic intention seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of at least contrived bodhicitta motivation, that we should engage in this teaching.
To
give you the blessing of oral transmission, allow me to read a couple of passages from this great Lamrim text, volume number 3 in English translation.
Karsa, Alio, Logiro Marsh. Nipo Simetro, Moro, Dani, Gobasin, Jimbo, Bani, Solo Sobo, Keleman, Semi Motobormidi, Semitrobaino. On the Namguin, the Semichi, Sumbo, Chitati, and Denny, Jitin, Milosobi, Shivano, Tiakonan, Tiakonan, Sama Kappa Kaki. Yutanje Samakabama, Kapamino, De Tayan, Junile, Desanatikonani, Samba, Lava Pavano, Semai, Papa, my bata, near my no, Jidi, never Javan de Tiakonani, number of Javal and Jidi, Yuton, Samaraki, and the Teta Yindam. Kitty did Samayino, Jidi, Tommy, Payaji, Pavalanji. Lumasamara no shares on the Chinje, the Milava Soba, the Conimity, Conani, and Yavi, Popi, Lamacon, the Sidumda, Tevada, Sidumda, Teva, Tam, Sabadamo, Gombala Soba, Jumbo, Jibutan Cheva, my evangelization, and attended to my teacher. No music the semi DJ, the Nicola Jedi never made song bear so. Reserve about the Japan Devali, Adenani, Yuba, Yetan, the Tom, and the She of Trouble, the Niji. Make now Naya, Semami, Tani, to Sudaso, Sema in Sudaso, Sema in the Decola, David, the Papa. Palum, Semukobara, Teleship, and Megi, Shiva Suhini. Nyabala na tome de ta sheva tang da sudra sura so ta vi chere de phalam so tome de tesa na shin de ve ti de ba ji ndo o na shija bi de ba le khang yang de ong bo nam ba sheva de ngo se ye de do ta ni zema ni do do ba sheva de shi shin de man je ba she go mi le shi ba ni ji de na zema ni de be dong na Number show the Dishi, Zumali, Shaded, Jimata, Sonso, Kangshi, Zunshi, Zumali, Shujin, Jimata, Batini, Loshi, Tenny, Jimata, Batini, Milo, Maid, Tenny, Miloa, Tenny, Milo. Maishi, Milos of Shiva, number 7, but Chirica, which is our ten on the day, make no what Samami issues over the window. Toby nation, the Shiva, Shiva, Chow, that the Migi Shiva lost over no more Samay, but Samay Bakabani. Togu, the Wakabay, Tomara, the Lulu, she's a bit Jabali. Togo and the University, Tonawate, Ma Shambi, Shiva Shunu, Shit Tambo, Kone, Jawa, Juruba, imitated, but Shavi, Musukanshi Imba. Yes, you talk about show. That is shower. Tagon to Shunzum, the Tirikis Karsa, Kanji, the Chonga, the Kanji Ometawa said this on any. Tardon se gorse, tardon se alguien gajangu sem gorse. Gajangu masena, en tardon se me pen pungwa do de ne, subu nga mai se choa mai duk se de mani betel ponis lana, en kaza tayit me batan do gorwa. Tat du maris. Gajangu singu re be de jere, yunde lang de tamji yo re si. La ne da chonga di da ha jang shodo de wa. Ti en chö tamji yo maris. Ya la ni ki da ti ye be de da mahi Lunkajira, the mount of the Hijab and Java, Diane Java Telsin, in the lake unit to Ganga TV regime on what dance on. What the tongue, Paka, the tongue that Hashang suits ever to go till the end of the day. 다 체면도 가서 유에서는 다 레긴데 자지 타지 유에나 에네 체면도 그러와서
No, so.
다디 베네 쇠바시도 담다 치료에나데 낭바 편지는 쓰이나 쇠베 방부를 어디까지 체면도 유에와시 체면 모두 메왔다 유에도 메세 체면다고 그러와
No.
어디 시월이다 근데 니 형아디도 비지 체면케는 거 말다 랑우 체면케는 거와
No, so.
저다 디스고 다 결혼다 유에서 이 히잡을 롱다디 저하고 타네 이니 유에송 유에서 라고도 왔어 디 유는 다 체면도 그거 왔어 다 언제 체면도 되고
No, then.
so 다시 다 체면 처음부터 되었지 다 체면 요마스 그 유디디 히고라
No, then, no, so.
체면 요마스 시다 요마스 다 간저 돌 걸서 맥도 나나 체면이 세디 직직들 요마래
No.
롱디데 그 직신 당하니 시다 체면 요마스 다 또 시당도 어떻게 용을 다디 용걸 사지 그런 포드 고도 말이나 이게 대 척버려 또 척마라
So Geshe read a couple of passages from page 163, which is not labeled as 163, but you know, it's called valid establishment, and to page 165. Now, as you can see, that we are really dealing with many complex, what called rationalization or the reasoning, as we look at different positions being asserted and refuted, or the arguments between different schools of thought. Just to kind of contextualize, these particular, these passages. Remember, we talked about. How, according to Madhyamikins, or the middle philosophers, that everything that exists, we call phenomenon or phenomena, are merely imputed, okay? Imputed by terms and concepts, okay? And so in order to understand that very concept of mere labeling or imputation, it is a must that in the beginning we should identify what is being negated or refuted. It is called the object of negation or refutation. Okay. In Tibetan words called gakcha. We really have to have a precise understanding or image of what is being refuted. Okay. Otherwise, if we don't have that clear image of what is being refuted, and then we put a phenomena under analysis. Let's say, we are analyzing self or a person, okay, whether a self or person exists or not. And then we try to, look within our body and mind, whether any of the physical aggregates are the self or the person, or any of the, different types of mind are the self or the person. At the end of the analysis, we don't find it, right? And then we might conclude, well, now what this tells me is a person or a self does not exist at all. With that, we fall into the extreme of nihilism. Right now, we have refuted, something that exists. Okay? Why this problem comes up with us is in the beginning, we really have not identified precisely and clearly what is being refuted or negated. Okay? So according to Madhyamikins, that's very important. Madhyamikins in this particular case, as I have said many times, are having a dialogue or debate with followers of Hoshang Mahayana. Okay? Because Hoshang said, basically, is that phenomena exist for our mistaken states of mind or consciousness. So from that perspective, look like they exist. But in reality, Hoshang said, if you look for them, you don't find anything that exists. So therefore, nothing exists at all. Right? How Hoshang got into that position is because, according to Madhyamikins, he has failed to identify precisely what is being refuted or negated. And so in order to assert that phenomena do exist conventionally, so we quote many different sources. The majority of our quotes come from the 400 stanzas of middle way called Chatuksheda and Chandakiti's commentary on the middle way, right? And so in order to say that things do exist really conventionally, but still the debate goes on, And Hoshang says, still he's not giving up, right? Hoshang would say like, well, in order for something to exist, right, we call it a phenomenon. How do we know a phenomenon exists? He said, don't you guys assert that, the existence of a phenomenon must be established by a valid cognition, valid perception, depending on what is sema, pramana in Sanskrit, right? Because a valid cognition can verify the existence of a phenomenon or a thing. Okay? And the Madhyamikan said, yes, that's what we say. That's how we establish something exists, something doesn't exist. And Hoshang said, well, but there is no such thing as valid cognition. Nothing exists really. Okay? And then he goes and refers back to some of the original statements from Buddha in the sutras, where Buddha some might have said there's no ear, no nose, things like that. He said, that's what Buddha said exactly. Really, ultimately, nothing exists, And why you guys still think, there is valid cognition that establishes the existence of phenomena? So you got it wrong. So Hoshang is still, pushing his position onto the Madhyamikans.
다들 니빠 세메 조모도 따는 거발 수인지 메뉴반에 스타 하정 저러고 딱지신에 에네 연의 세메 조고 이제 세마야마 딱 봐시는 엔rol로 늦은 조고 말해서 그러와 디스는 소소와 케 멜렘반 카 소소바 케 렘반이 세메 마주바 민데지 세메 조바 이노 세다 유세 신신제라 엔 소소 케 란사데 세메 조바 되고 그러와 세메 마도는 예반 되고 말이 세메 조바 되고 유세 그러와 오늘 중 가자 남근직의 셈이 시수 시바 인자 넣으세 엄마 집에 가서 남근직의 셈이 되지세야 책지와 말해 그때 뒤통 가래세나 되는 직대에 매일서 희바는 때코나에 셈을 가고 유탄지의 소에 가봐 메노스 다디 때가 죽어데 남근직의 셈이 세야데 먼저 데려와 매다 나와라서 와서 네 때코나에 쓴다 돈이 쓰는다 간제 간다자 드설에는 제마만 쓰고 말이지 유칸 제마만 쓰고 말이 싫어봐 매그 통야도 소리 나야야 다리 뭐지 나야 소 통야다 매그 다트야들 여봐봐 티카가 저다 어디 더 남기직진 셈이야 디더다를 뭐지 세상 제마면 돈 말이지 다디 도시 요금을 그냥 영유시는 뭐야
And Madhyamikans are telling and in this particular case Hoshang and the followers, no, valid cognitions do exist. When we say things exist, forms exist, sound exists, smell exists, the only way we know they exist is because there are valid cognitions, cognizing them. So these valid cognitions can verify the existence of this phenomena, And you are telling us that valid cognitions don't exist. We don't accept that. Valid cognitions do exist. And then Hoshang comes back, okay, then how do you guys interpret this statement from statement made by the Buddha? It's on page, as I said, 100 and those who have the text, 163, where it reads, I quote, "The world is not valid in any way." So now Hoshang said, now how do you understand that? Buddha said the world is not valid in any way, right? I hope that's the exact translation of what is in Tibetan. Anyway. And then Madhyamikan said, okay, we can explain to you what it means. Okay? This statement should not be interpreted or understood as if, things don't exist at all and there are no valid cognitions, perceiving them. That's not the interpretation of this. What this really means is that, for example, the worldly perceptions, such as the visual consciousness, the auditory consciousness, these things are not valid cognitions with regard to the ultimate nature of phenomena, that is emptiness. Okay? These sensory consciousnesses, for example, are ordinary, right? The eye consciousness sees forms but doesn't hear sounds. Auditory consciousness hears stuff but doesn't see forms, you see. But, eye consciousness, it can be valid to visible forms, and auditory consciousness can be a valid perception with regard to sounds. Okay? But what Buddha meant, or that statement meant, is that these consciousnesses, or the worldly perceptions, are not valid cognitions with regard to emptiness, the ultimate nature of phenomena. So that is the interpretation of that statement.
어디 디 콩르 대다른 중절에 대다는 때코나니를 봐봐 남 코나 세마인지 파바 마이 바타네 마이노 제든 지데 네바 제반 디베 디 코나니 넘버 제발은 지데 좀 세마나 켈레네 티다 인당 걔든 지데 세마이는 지데 띵이 더 파이 지고 파벨라 지키자스 다 되게 다들 니마디 남군 지데 세미자지 어머 집에 자 주바 코로나 말
노소.
다들 중대 다티 야 남군 지데 세미세야 되게 이 맥도나발 제단 세마 메세와티 이 중대 코로나 티 어머 집에 랑데리 송고로 봐 세다 티 카레센데 티 코나이 파바는 코나 세마인 있었다 돈이라 이 파바는 코나 세마리 마디 이 지데바선 다간도 돈이 마도 미도서로 봐 메인으로 쓰는 되게로 봐 지서 이 맥도나발라서 카레는 되게 간지 지서 이 돈이 세마 마리 돈이라 이 파바 코나 세마리 에스
노소.
다 계신 지데 맥도나발라서 봐 지서 이 돈이 또 더기나 이는 건도 람곰니 깔리 잡는 야 팔음 조고야 되게 요마르바스 저바 맥도도 위는 거 곰가 요마르바
그래.
호세도 티 셔도 송도 하셔다 지구 파벨라 이시 샤스다는 그래서 맥도 나와서 이네 돈을 세마에는 이는 팔음도 곰는 람랑 베바시는 곰고하다 그 맥도 나유 임베셔도 되는 리고로 어디서 거다 또 돈야 됐던 거다 다 그래서 지도 참막거나 많이 쓰고로 봐 돈이 좀 먹어보시 지단 좀 많이 라고로 지금 맥소를 세마다 나와달 세마레디로 봐
No. As a matter of fact, just to correct a little bit, the world is not valid in any way. That statement comes out of Madhyamika, avatar, or supplement to the middle way. Okay, and so according to Huashang, what that really should mean is, right, in the end, no worldly perceptions are valid, and there's no such thing as. That's his interpretation of things. Okay, and Chandrakirti says, no, that's not what it is. So, as you can see at the bottom of page 163, there is an explanation of the middle way from Chandrakirti there. Okay? So that's one passage there. So Geshe has explained what it means. What it really means is that our worldly sensory perceptions, such as the visual consciousness or the perception, eye perception, or the auditory or the ear consciousness, these are not valid with regard to emptiness, the ultimate nature of phenomena. But that does not mean these worldly perceptions cannot be valid in every case, because they are valid to their respective objects of apprehension. Just as I said, visual consciousness can be valid consciousness with regard to forms, visible, and auditory can be valid perception with regard to the sounds, and so forth. Okay? And here's the difference that we need to understand, that only transcendental beings' perception, that means Aryas, Tibetan called Pakpa, transcendental, those who have gained direct insight into emptiness, my first footnote. Okay? So that perception is a valid perception or cognition with regard to emptiness, but not the perceptions of worldly or ordinary people like us. So ordinary people means those who have not gained direct realization or understanding of emptiness. So we are ordinary people. Okay? So our sensory perceptions could be valid with regard to their respective objects, but our sensory perceptions cannot be valid cognition of emptiness. Okay? If there could be, or if they are, then there is no point in cultivating paths, doing meditation. Well, I sees the emptiness, so why we want to make, take the trouble to cultivate and meditate and do, we don't need. Why we're wasting our time, It makes no sense. The fact that, we have to cultivate the path, in order to gain insight into emptiness shows that our sensory perceptions, right, do not perceive emptiness, directly, and they are not the valid cognition of emptiness.
lumpas mar hiesong ti chinre de melo soba da kone te kona yebe je pabe lam khundi shwa che je chrim da theba da samba da gomba la soba driba dimba lan driba de ba mai ban jurwa higna tene de da mai nos ti da ngande shine sa da ro ro ti re ro zawe ngel sheba je tene zawa chang san de ngande she zawa chang di jul jan shine se ro da da ni jan 다다다 디주 시딜 가르서 디송야 메일 소바다 콘 코네 데 코네 니에베 셰르스다 맥도날라서 돈이 동고 연스고로
Lore.
파벨은 그도 셰와 셰르 세dum도 퇴바도 삼바도 고발라사발 드림번 드부도 제바 마이번 조와 히그나 테네테다 마이노스 제다 맥 나와서마이네 이것도 세dum송 에네 짐바당시 에네 칼레 마보자 송이 숭리시에 에네 돈이 또고야 요 말스 그러바 맥다 나와다 롱아다 원바데데 뭐 암저에서 강하신 고거로 와. 자 돈이 있어야 돼. 제가 맥다 나 유에나 인디레 세dum송이 시라칼리 자고야 방금도야 돈다 문도 와스. 그러바 드림도 세디잖아. 배 삽사신 시고로 와.
Long.
어디 지거데 인디 말아봤지. 인디 방금 돈달래 인디 배 세dum송 퇴바시 칼리자 드부여로 봤어. 그때 드부여에서 제가 맥다 나왔지. 인디 세마 말이지. 돈이 레달. 그러바 돈이 세마에는 다 소사고야 요 말아.
Lore. On top of page 164, from explanation of the middle way commentary by Chandrakirti, which reads, because mere visual consciousness and such would ascertain reality, it would be fruitless to work at ethics or to study, reflect, and meditate in order to understand the noble path. However, this is not the case, okay, unquote. So what this really means is if our sensory consciousnesses, ordinary, such as eye consciousness and auditory consciousness, can be valid cognitions of emptiness, then there is really no point in making so much effort to cultivate the path to understand emptiness. Okay? And so which means usually how we say that we need to accumulate both merit and wisdom in order to realize emptiness, okay, to make progress, then it will be pointless. Okay? What is the point of having to study emptiness, then contemplate its meaning, and then meditate on its meaning? Because all of those things are just fruitless or useless because our eye sees the emptiness directly. So who wants to do all the extra work? Nobody would want. But that's not the case. You see, the fact that we have to study, contemplate, and meditate on emptiness tells us that our sensory consciousnesses, are not valid perceptions of emptiness. There could be valid perceptions of other things, but not of emptiness. Okay.
그래서 많이 넣어서 뒤에서 유전 뒤에서 능근지도 세미대 뒤니까 지대 내와미 제송배 소서 제가 유전 뒤에서 대관한 일 세마이나 지대게 매가 나와서 대세마이네 아니 파글럼다 베게 신루를 제와 도매대 태외 유전 뒤에서나 아니 지대게 매가 나와에 대관에 도고 말이 스타디 마케도와 제송배 소 다디마지 릭바 주주변 저한테 안 단데르만 저발레게 되는데 여반이 있다니听通我们的学校周，听就是中间的一每个那怎么面写作成本那语气不进，这块呢了怎么也不搞给，语现在呢没把写信的少那我是，这是日本出去本这话就送的啊，是中间的一每个那那怎么面啥有啥话，是大家让的中国了，是的这样的，我这块呢也怎么没有是这那个什么就。맥게 소 세마다 나와 달 세마 많이 쓰고 말이 쓰러와 뒤다 리버트 좀 생겼어 그래서 예 정바 유체바지 대코에 세마바 가기스다 유체바지 동일 세마바 가 뭐도 유현을 다도 소 세마바 가요 말이 신신도 세와 나오서 디 세번도 쓰고로 다 대들 마시는 재미된 저때 메로서비 희바데다 타니베 돈 수자라 세마이는 대코에 대해서도 박름제와 메고 타로 해면은 메기 시베 수시니 녀바 나와 도메디 타 해바다 해바다 자 해바탕 자 수자라서 대해서도 박름소와 도메디 타 세는 현디 되베 되는 되베 지도스 디다 디케지 다다 롱루 고만 데자데 마요시 ini megda nawa tuzo ini karsa dal sema mar megdi pe sol sema da nawa de dal sema maris ti na ini te kona ni tobe to de palun se wa thome wa tha se labna in jawab sha ro go ro ta pe meg sok to de na da ni ba thome wa ta se so cha go ro ba o chi da de me cha do se ro ti chno long ti ma ali ronglu pa len ja tak da yin kesi dinde mai no chon nu ji tin du so da right?
No, sir. We are on page 164, pretty much on the top, somewhat to the middle, where from commentary on the middle way it says, because the world is not valid in any way, the world has no critique in the context of reality. Now, explanation given on that is the world, referring in this particular context to our worldly sensory perceptions. Okay, they are not valid in the sense, not valid to emptiness. Okay, so by implication, what I mean is that we need to practice the 6 perfections, right, in order to progress on the path and realize emptiness. If the world or the sensory worldly sensory perceptions, a mouthful to repeat, are valid to emptiness, then there is no point in practicing the paramitas or the 6 perfections, because that makes no sense. Okay? And then, we have, again, quote from Chandrakirti's commentary on Arya Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas of reasoning, okay? Where, it's really clearly stated pretty much that what the Buddha said is that here, the eye, ear, and nose consciousness are not valid cognition. This is where the Hoshang really misinterpreted it. He said, so that means they don't exist, but that's not what the meaning of is. The meaning is clearly explained in Chandrakirti's commentary on the 60 stanzas of reasoning, that our sensory perceptions, visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, and all others, they could be valid with regard to their respective objects. They are only not valid with regard to emptiness. Okay, so then I think the Hoshang comes back, kind of thing, says that that if they could be valid to their respective consciousness, then it would be really pointless to study, reflect, and meditate on emptiness. And to this, Chandrakirti says, now these 2 things have no correlation with each other. There has no correlation, and you're bringing up a totally irrelevant point here. Yes.
Okay, then the page soon to me inside the and Karsa Panus to a Tomata in make the now to the data so the 7 might be Chelsea and Jamie is surgical.
No, so.
That's so the data so to the data with the Panus to a Tomata and there is like the Sugata on the college Marva.
No.
But this is in there, yes. Said the Chilanga Tasetoya typical New Zealand do that's it. The Kaji Mindever drove down the what car as Google. That don't let them do a slap on in the condition to over.
No, so.
So the New Zealand Mindever chair dropped to see what.
Can't the young judge can scan out again.
Like did it. And the Chilanga in a tick cotton you saw a layer and the Karsa. Tick on your dog, Palunso, Tomea, and make the soul sama that because now I did some money be Chelsea and Jamie is river.
No,
River that makes so to now told me the make so to is also here on raw. Didn't job and do
no, so.
that did my say, Karsa Sugala Saba did that Tommy to the Palunso told me a task and then there said, once Palunso Sugatonga to the Sego Marva,
No, so.
only to the Sego, but Sugating on the Sono Garava.
No, so.
This one. So do you need to
No. So basically here, the Madhyamikans are telling their opponent, Hoshang, that your arguments are not really valid arguments. One way you're making an argument that is what we call that has nothing to do with each other, no correlation and irrelevant making argument. For example, you say that if the worldly perceptions can be valid to the respective objects, it is fruitless to study, reflect, and meditate on emptiness. That's irrelevant, because those two things have nothing to do with each other. So really, your argument is not attacking any of our positions, because that's irrelevant. But on the other hand, if you say that it would be fruitless to study, reflect, meditate on emptiness in order for the sensory perceptions to be valid with regard to their, objects, then we agree with that, because we are cultivating, we are study, reflect, and meditate on emptiness in order to realize emptiness, not because our visual consciousness will become valid to its form and auditory consciousness will become valid to the sound. You see, that's not what we are seeking, Yes.
오늘 히잡은 저와래 거연디 엉보 넘버 시버디 무슨 유디 로다니 신참만이 도 시버대 신신디 만저와 시고 밀레 시버니 지딘 나 참만이도 돈 넘버 시버 정된되긴 뒤시 임베치 즈발리 최진의 유마도 송소 건식 즈발리 최진의 유마도 되는 밀로 마이데 넘버 신디 네비我number写的那一些的，但是我那什么你的大把人把买的，number写把他们这什么你的，台湾就写入写，没有说把写把那什么，因把这个把写的写的成样的的呢，没得那我什么没写说当门照啊，我特别你现在有写吧。小这点每个希望老师那五十人不3万人不搞吧呢，多个人都不搞吧人呗，他们的路就是他的西家文这话这个事儿开始，但是安不能吧，希望你的罗丹是啊的，他逻辑都是这些事儿哇，是啊的他这个他，因为他的因为每个那么是这是这个问题，因为跑路本对吧对呢。any take on here or study do you have the here is this one is that the baru do you the but that karsa yang didn't make now some we saw the mentor to be ni hit the show che shape the shape show the other big shivala so no musin but the same baga but to gi and the baga by imbe the but 통모라 디 look you know hijab jabali 도쿄와 되는 지디베 돈라 때 마셔위 시바 쇼니터 어디 시 당보 코너니 정말 샤와 요아 임비 뜻때 마셔위 교기 무슨 거시 이시 시 게신 다보시 예메바 시바 무슨 이노 시바 시저와 시 강도바 저 도바 지시 강 돈을 명도 소名的人是那不容得吧兄弟，就是也不得这当这位是安不那么些吧，你预计上给生意有的没有咱们些了，就别些，我什么一点就些的些什么的，多把的这些没注意些吧，你我什么有的对，对了，没注意你预计上给生意是的，那把的这么些，安不些呗，我什么那个让真教呢，苏扎老说别让真用我说我不得到给写家人别，得到咱们这样，用我不得让真也不对的，老问题你写完就但让我这把我们让给真让个真有这那他有的没写别，俺不写吧得呢，让真咱们看了写的呢。得到他们也不搞完，他那有爱人心诚意了，他们都要搞完赢了。我认的中的的，那准备老送不的我说是，他这下看见，我这开始听久了，我这，但是心情习惯了，点着那一家，一直那一家是要是吧？他容易我明显这个，那我说那些才没做事是吧？我他这个样的对吧？我的。这个的不就知道个有什么嘛的事了呀嘛的事，那的出来，安心啊，他希望我不的，那的有什么嘛的事干的嘛都是，知道什么干的嘛的事干嘛的事，这个的是呢， ngonzu loi na ini dendo na chapsi go ro
Lore.
ta no ta chama ina dema thog go ro
No.
ta dema ma de senju ge sa tham ja de ro
Lore.
o ti ka go sta da hijab ndo wale ongbo chama ma yu sa de de yin se de ongbo de ro ba rang sing yu chwa chama ma yu se ma ji dang ge ya ini yu so chama de dal chama ma yu se go yo ma de sta do de tere do wa ji ma nyok da ma wu ta du ya de ta thon da de ne tere
No, sir. Ombudsman sama means again. Rang na yuli at sama means.
no
Na mutao do ale sama
no
means.
no ta chama ma yu
No, so. So Geshe is commenting on the passages he read from the bottom page 164. Chandrakirti's commentary on the 400 stanzas onto page 165, which seems very complex. But this the essence of all this thing is this. And then one of the statements, again, now they are debating about this, it looks like the change is, somewhere it said that, sensory consciousnesses are not valid. Yeah, so what does that mean? Yeah, or sensory perceptions are not valid. Yeah, Ongbo Semin in Tibetan. And according to the Prasangika Madhyamikins, yeah, that our perceptions, I should say, the things do not exist the way they appear to exist to our perceptions. Are you with me? The things appear to our perceptions as truly existent, intrinsically existent, but they don't exist that way. Okay? So our ordinary perceptions are, according to Prasangika Madhyamikins, are what we call influenced by that grasping at intrinsic existence. Okay? And so therefore, from that point of view, our the ordinary perceptions really they do not see the disparity between appearance and the reality, isn't it? How things appear to us in one way and how they exist in another way. So from that point of view, they are not valid with regard to that phenomenon. Yeah? But our perceptions could be valid to their own respective objects, as we said. We are not denying that visual consciousness can be valid with regard to some visible form, or ordinary consciousness can be valid cognition with regard to a certain sound, and so forth. We are not denying that, but what we're saying is our ordinary perceptions, they do not see the disparity between the way things appear to us and the way they exist, And so that's a Prasangika Madhyamika's point of view. Okay. If our ordinary perceptions are seeing the truth as it is, then the way things appear to them is truly existent. They must see that, isn't it? If that is the case, then intrinsic existence does exist. But Prasangika is taking all the trouble to say that there is nothing that exists intrinsically and truly. Are you with me? Okay. So that is the Prasangika's point of view. Now the Sevatandika Madhyamikins, the other sub-school of Madhyamika and the schools below, according to them, okay, things exist just the way they appear to our perceptions. That's their position. Okay? And so Prasangika is refuting that. Things do not exist just the way they appear to our perceptions. So that's the debate between Prasangika Madhyamikins and then a bunch of schools, right? Sevatandika Madhyamikins and schools below. Okay.
어디 다 공주도 그래서 좀 된데 대송도 가서 단다 언신가 뭐도 간가 뇌 최진이 송송 공주는 좀 되는 남시 남 즈발로 송바 되고 남이가 즈발로 최진이 송샤 즈발로 최진이도 가르서는 데레다 간지 밀어서야 단다 가서 히지지 밀어서도 동의 거하지 동의 뭐 쉬어 간가 lö서야죠 봐 니디니디 무슨 사죠 말해 어디게 쉬어라 셔도 그 lö서도 그 데로 나인자 되게 lö서 됐고 레스 팅고 레스 대야 lö서 배 밀어간 세마에 뭔고 lö는 세메도 가르사 lö 세마에 뭔고 밀어는 세메도 비시는 거 세메 생이 될 아니 밀어 히바 리바샤고 봐 단다 런지 문제 되게 사드 밀어 하자고 tenjulo 사드 밀어 먹어시 밀어 히바 세메팅 샤고 봐 어디 샤고리 셔도 어이도 이네 속달라서부터 나왔다래 밀어 말이스 나왔다 밀어 있는데 데마토고 봐 런지도 데마토 난거 봐 나왔다디 이네 카드 마도 인상 이네 거들 로아레스 봐 어 양코 숙자스 마도 쓰고 말다. 나와다 마도 쓰고, 그봐.
No.
어디래? this 좀 된데 롱래 거도 르아 쉬진 송이 르아 사이도 텐데 나와다 마르베 줌바데 테 르아 송레스 어디래도.
No. And the Prasangika mathematicians are saying that the worldly perceptions, do not see the disparity between the way things appear to them and the way they actually exist. Okay, so from that point of view, our perceptions can be considered as deceptive in a sense. And going back to what the Buddha said at the bottom of page 164, in that quote from 400 stanzas, I read, where is it? The Bhagavan said that even consciousness, because it is composite, has a false and deceptive quality and is like a magician's illusion. Okay, so what it means is that to our ordinary perceptions, things appear as intrinsically existent. That's the appearance. So with regard to the appearance, our perceptions are, not valid. They are false. Okay, they're deceptive. By that, we don't mean that all our perceptions are deceptive or invalid in all respects. Because with regard to their respective objects, just as I said, visual consciousness with regard to visible form, it is valid. Okay, so that's the distinction we need to make and we need to understand. Because in the Buddhist literatures, sometimes we use the word luwa, means deceptive. Luwa could be referred to every phenomenon that is not emptiness. Sometimes we use that term to mean it. Okay, that which is non-deceptive is only refers to the emptiness, miluwa. Okay, so the different usage and understanding of those terminology, how it is being used. Okay, and according to Prasangika mathematicians, a valid consciousness is that which is not mistaken to its object. Milube rikpa. That's the definition of a valid cognition. That which is not mistaken, miluba in the sense not false or deceptive with regard to its object. But according to the Savatandika mathematicians, they add a new word. They say a valid cognition is that which is not mistaken. It's a newly arisen perception which is not mistaken to its object. So because of those, the way they define things, so they have a difference in their positions. So that is the complexity of things, how we need to understand the uses of the term, in different sense.
오늘 누구 가이냐는 남바 히드니에 뭐보 남바 히드나와 해서만 디인데 언히나라 숙자소 유가보테는 랑 생이 마접 시엔디 랑 생이 집안나면은 대다랑 생이라 체험하면 해봤대 너는 엉부 해봤다 유가 랑젠을 체험하면데 유가 랑젠 나와라 되데 리치 유가 랑 생이 동신도 랑젠 나이셔스 다때 세르도알 다 루루 가데세나 남바 힌두 거 내와 남바 힌두 돈달에 숙자라서바드 데미 랑시 메반데바 임발라 애니 히바트소 나오디 랑시 저와나라와 되게 루동을 테레스거와 근데 랑시 마저신데 랑시 나 제나 대다랑이 생일라 체마마이는 해바데 너는 엉부 히바다 다 노르스드는 엉부 히바다 유가 랑젠 체마마이스타 가지 랑젠스나다 데바르바스나다 랑시 저와선 지바라와 어때 가지 나와다 마저 데바르바 체마마이스라와 랑젠 체마마이스나다 나와다 체마마이스나다 따티기가 더다 저지르고라와 체마마인데 유가 랑젠 나와데 리시 유가 랑시 동신도 랑젠나에 저시다 유가 수자라서 유가 어디 랑젠이 줘요 말이 언시가 어디 랑젠 집안나와 시다 시다는 콜루던데 테레스 그래봐 다디 빼 가르서는 빼는 다와 다니나요 다니나에 시바신 냠도 공부하고 세상 다와니스나요 시바 먼저 다와니나요 시바데 다지 뭐도 말마 다니나요 시바데 이네 로아스 그래봐 어쨌든 빼도 테레스 그래봐
So now at the bottom of page 163, it seems like there is kind of a more clarification being offered, on the same matter. this is what Geshe said, that in actuality or reality, the five sensual objects or the five objects of our sensory perceptions, you see, they are empty of, right? They lack intrinsic existence or true existence. That is their ultimate nature. That being said, the way these objects appear to our perceptions as if they are intrinsically existent or they are truly existent. So there is a disparity between how they actually exist and how they appear to our perceptions, isn't it? Okay. So our perceptions with regard to that appearance is a false perception. It's very hard to translate the Tibetan word called lua, milua. Lua is, sometimes we say deceptive, sometimes not valid, sometimes it's false, right? So with regard to that appearance, our perceptions are not valid, they are false, they are deceptive. Why? Because they appear to our perceptions as truly existence, isn't it? Yeah. And so which means our perceptions are not valid with regard to intrinsic existence or the true existence. And the example given to illustrate that point is just as, due to some whatever factors, somebody's eye sees two moons up in the sky, right? So with regard to the appearance, that visual consciousness is false, deceptive, because in reality there's only one moon. If you are seeing two moons, there is a problem, isn't it? It's the same thing.
No.
So just as we say, we could perceive form validly because form exists. Just a moon exists, isn't it? So the form exists. So on that level, they are parallel, same, isn't it? Okay. Just as there are no two moons. If anybody is seeing two moons or has appeared two moons, right? So you should know, there is something wrong with our perception. In the same way, forms do exist, but they do not exist truly. If the forms appear to us as truly existent, it's just like seeing two moons. Okay? It is not there.
Drosa mela, yungal tsema mason nang, di rang tsingil tseman droa do. Ta di cheba de da kanje, tanda rangji tanda de ngobo ma song ke mo de rangji meji ji ba kanje rangji meji be any yutil tsema son rangong cheba tsema son chap se go ta.
Yutil tsema son.
Oh, yutil tsema son rangong cheba tsema son chap se go ro. Ta tenjo jiwo we ta rangong cheba yu yo ma se ko tsema yo ma ro. Oh, this is what that. 제가 유코런리아 랑원저 처음 맞는 동신들 하토 말했어요. 그죠? 그래서 랑원 저가 메도라. 어디서 하토 말했어. 다 로봇인데 랑 생이 담고 좀 데버트비 유 데버트바 넘버 조베 처음 랑제 처음 송 거장 유니 좀바인 베트남 넘버 조베 처음 rang tsingi la tsama songa migute sitere da yu damba tawa da rangji tawa khela na ene teso na rangzen la tsama dogo goris da yu tamji zumba donge tenjo agishi na ene yu tel tsama na rangzen tsama dogo ma res ta di kheba shi wa da rangji meji ji wa da damba tawa senene semjaba meji chagra da rangong tawa senene rangji ba ma tenjo ra ka che shi da ya ma da kha o de da tenjo wa de go ma res 로 유 덴바도네 ene rangong tsama dogo de yu zumba yu ganga zumba de da ene rangong tawa tsama dogo ya ma res
According to essentialist Ngömawa in Tibetan, which basically includes Savatandika, Madhyamikans, and school below, okay, they assert that things exist from their own side, right? Okay, and so according to them, if perceptions are valid with regard to objects, any objects, then there should also be valid cognition with regard to the intrinsic nature of objects. Okay, intrinsic existence of the objects. That's their position. Why? Because they think that things really do exist from their side. Okay, And if we refute that, they don't exist from their side, then they say, well, then things can't exist at all. Then nothing could function, So they're not able to establish the functionality, the cause and effect relationship and the functionality of things. So therefore, according to the essentialist, if perceptions are valid with regard to their objects, they are also valid cognition with regard to the intrinsic nature of their objects. Okay, that is position. Prasankika Madhyamika can say, no. Okay. Perceptions can be valid with regard to their objects, but they can't be valid with regard to their intrinsic nature because there is no intrinsic existence. Okay? And so therefore they are false or deceptive or invalid with regard to the intrinsic nature of phenomena. So that is the big difference between the two positions, the Prasangika Madhyamikans and the essentialist position. And so because, according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, things appear to exist intrinsically, that is the appearance part, but they really don't exist that way. So therefore, things are empty of intrinsic existence. Yet things do exist, things do function. That is Prasangika Madhyamika's position. For the essentialist, things exist intrinsically. So therefore, perceptions are valid truth objects, valid to their intrinsic nature. Otherwise, they couldn't assert, right, the functionality of things. So that's the big difference between the two positions.
No, there is Jidan Tesgarza. Demba Trubna, and a thousand Nigu. Jidan, you know what thousand Nigu Maris Riva. Not the Kansa in the Chaki of Sena, thousand Nigu Maris in the Kansa, you Yorava.
No.
Said the Demba Trubna. Kona Sulamata took of Gaza, Shaki say I'm a Dirisha, didn't that when you could then Dodos Gura, or they go, did Jimadura, said that tell you a day, 10 years I'm shy in the end. Delia, any Ramuto, Samason, did they get a Kayamaras? River, Jidi, which you do, Mindu say, okay, Samason, Pomando, Sikawa, say, or did it some shower major, Sikawa, someone does that country, the Interjiva Shogo, Yamara?
No, sure. So according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, if perceptions are valid to the intrinsic nature of phenomena, then that intrinsic nature should be findable under rational analysis or ultimate analysis. Okay? But it is unfindable. Right? That's Prasangika's whole point of view. They said we have to clearly identify precisely the intrinsic nature of phenomena, and then we can say whether things exist intrinsically or not. And under that rational analysis, ultimate analysis, it is unfindable. So which means what? Which means things don't exist intrinsically, but it does not mean things don't exist at all. That is Prasangika's position. Okay? And so therefore, according to Prasangika, perceptions cannot be valid to the intrinsic nature of things because it doesn't exist. So, we really don't talk about, valid cognitions with regard to something that doesn't exist. That's what the Prasangika's the position is. According to Prasangikas, as I said some other day, they accept the conventional phenomena just like the worldly people say, right? Just like the worldly people say, hey, there is a pot, there is a pillar, and we see the pots and pillar validly. And Prasangika said, that's all we take, just like the worldly convention. We don't tell them like, well, what do you really mean by vase exists, pillar exists? What do you mean by valid? We don't put these conventional things under rational analysis. We don't do that, okay?
But they come to the Hijavan Javal and the daughter of Hijavan Java. Hijavan Javal Javal Jigde, Pe Tonga, de Kona, Tonga Sewa Riba, my tenant Jide Kona, Seman Nimbi Shetta, Tea Migbe Tonga, Zubali, changing the Jewish, she has a teacher, Ranzel Semaina, Semain Bakape, Semasam, Kigmugu. 미국에는 타니비 힘만 타지비 힘만 세마 찌른 거봐 많이 넣어서 제가 다들 세마 많이 써야 돼. 아니 맥도 나와라서 버텨서 아니 엉벙가버디 유랑센 세마 많이 쓰라리 뭐 이제 지도 거라 아니 소 가서 맥디 미히디 아니 소 세마다 나시달 세마리고 어디 거봐 말레스 랑젤 세마에 버든 거고 레스르와 대다 마이나 밀레베 히반 직데나 세바 유디 통나 히에솜바 미릭데 타니베 히와 강이 탐질라 세마 킥비시로 다맥 남기다 나의 참마이나 인 어머가 다 참마 매우 차르고 와
No.
디차는 지대 통화 참마 있어야 돼 디카 요말 지대 통화 요말 봤어 다 so 맥도 소 참마이나 현달은 참마 요말 와
Not really.
어디서 왔다
No.
디 교환도 대담에 르 시반 지대는 참마이도 통화 시에서 뭐 메데 데 타집이 참마 거의 담지다 맥도 나의 시바도 참마이나 인 지대가 랑가 이제 참마 매우 차르고 와
Not really.
그래서 지대가 통화 참마 있어야 돼 되게 문도 쓰고 저
No. So we're at the bottom of page 166, where there is a commentary, a quote from Chandrakirti's commentary on 400 stanzas. The point Prasangikas are making is this, that worldly people like us, could have valid perceptions or cognitions, okay? Because our sensory perceptions, such as the visual consciousness, is valid to its visible forms. Auditory consciousness is valid to its sounds and things like that. Okay? And in the world, people do talk about, right? Hey, what is valid, what's not valid perception? So Prasangikas accept them as the worldly conventions, establish them. Okay? What the Prasangika is saying is the ordinary perceptions cannot be valid with regard to the intrinsic nature of things, okay? Because they refute the intrinsic nature of phenomena. Okay? By saying that, they're not saying that worldly people cannot have valid cognitions, because that would be a very absurd position, isn't it? And because then that means that all the sensory faculties valid that we have, really they don't exist at all. Prasangika said we can't say that. We go with the worldly convention. We accept what the world accepts. No.
Successfully, the Semakin Jidin, don't talk about number Habayino, you Musum the Jepatam, Lungdang, Yenji semi Namsha Zebatan and Gawa Geshe was it. That's the success, but then the success of your Semal Hiolarva, Ravati, some Musum Semashi, Jeva Semashi, and the Penyanji Semashi, Long Sema Hishadwa.
No, so.
Oh, the Shara, Semamin in Yasha Mara.
No.
What is it?
So, in the middle of page 167, we have a quote from Chandrakirti's clear words, text. So basically, this quote is to establish how Prasangika Madhyamikans do assert valid cognitions. They're not refuting valid perceptions. As a matter of fact, in that text, Chandrakirti talks about different types of valid cognitions. We talk about ngunsum, direct valid cognitions, okay, or maybe non-conceptual valid cognitions, right? Ngunsum sema. We talk about inferential valid cognitions, cheba sema in Tibetan. Okay, they talk about valid scriptural lungsama, scriptural authority. There is a valid statements. In other words, lungsama, and then it could be valid examples. So if Prasangikas don't accept anything that is valid, so he doesn't need to talk about different types of valid, validity things, isn't it? So which means that Prasangikas do accept the valid cognitions that exist in ordinary people.
Because the Kazankyo enjoy Chiro, Sema the Hijangu, you trouble Kaki, Sema the Hijate, Tende Mingo, the Tinil, and 6 aliens are. The Dajang, Pinju David Trabanjoti, Semata Yen, Hejeton Tau in Jola, Hejeton Diana, Semata di Georgi, Semata Hejang going Ichiban the Mayno, Heson, so that's what was 6 aliens. In the Moon, Semata, he just said the moon Yishua Yoma, Resera, that Ramun was the temperature, it was in the Tengu Gangachiba, Tuna, but the Semata Hejazam Government, Sema then Heja shower, Heja then Sema shower, Pinzu Tudo Reserva, or Juris, because Heja told out the John, Heja told you not Sema the Yogi. Sema he's a good year, but the mind was a good year to us, and the Demotra was there, now you to a body. Sema Heja Jinga in Demotra, Pinzu Tudo, Sema the Heja, because the Heja used the Sema shower, you told him in Sema Marva. So the Tongi Sama yet the Heja show me, because Tongi lobby in the call yet in Heja Shadow Mara. What the do of Tado teas or that.
So as it is clearly stated in Chandrakirti's clear words in the middle of page 167, that what the Prasangikas are really talking about is this, that there is no intrinsic nature of perceptions, intrinsically existent valid cognitions, intrinsically existent objects of valid cognitions. Okay? But they are not refuting the existence of valid cognitions and their objects. As a matter of fact, they assert the existence of valid cognitions, their objects. How? Because they are mutually interdependent on each other. Okay? If there is something to be observed, then we can talk about a valid perception with regard to that observed phenomenon, isn't it? Yeah. So the valid cognition is asserted from the point of view of what is being observed, its object, and its object can be established from the point of view of its subjective perception, isn't it? So because of this mutual dependency, we can talk about valid cognitions and their objects of comprehension or apprehension. Okay? If something doesn't exist at all, right, completely non-existent, we cannot talk about valid cognition with regard to something that doesn't exist. That shows the interdependent relationship between object and their subjective perception. That's what the Prasangikas do exert. What Prasangikas is refuting are these terms. These are the technical terms Prasangikas said. Intrinsic existence, there isn't such thing. True existence, tendu, there isn't such thing. Objective existence, nothing exists. Okay, so these are the things, Prasangika said, things don't exist from its own side, in and of itself, objectively, under its own characteristics, with a fixed entity. That's what's being refuted, not the valid cognitions and their objects of comprehension.
Tena rabra la sobe chinang tuju lebe never chinang tuju lebe never men marik be lebe angi la savana rangi me rangi yebe yunzaba na trube ni tanyibi chinji malopa la minute this or did that gaji jidang in tanda be jigdewe 통화 나시 샤고지 시나 tenjulo ya tsema de tsemi yawa chigrewa rewa da migi chunze barzo da de na raje dashe zawa sajirwa o tzo yo mara yang ko nang go de nang se ganga yang shag marse tinde ga in te tu le ma yin ba ne thongma me dang ji le mari ba gi le ba de ba na wa cham le ko tsema ka go mari rewa rewa da te tu le nge de na in tsema ma yin chago te tu le se de migi chunze ba da in the car dashe zawa na tzo ga ji hon jigden yongral ko yomar se cha ding ji yomare o til da take to level til tsama shang marwa o dire
we are in the middle of page 167 where the paragraph begins. Therefore, if a sensory consciousness is unimpaired, that is no eye disease or other internal or external cause of error is affecting it, then it is accurate in conventional terms and so forth. Now, Geshe is explaining that particular passage. According to Prasangika Madhyamikans, as we said, generally speaking, they assert what the worldly people and conventions say things exist. Okay, so that's Prasangika's position. But that does not mean everything that worldly people perceive are necessarily valid and unmistaken. Okay, Prasangikas do present about, what is valid perception, what is not valid perception. They do talk about that. Okay, so according to them, if our perceptions are affected by what we call terdi, means temporary, conditions, temporary conditions that confuse our perceptions. That's the word. Tibetan tool means, deceive or cheat us. So if our perceptions are affected by those temporary conditions, then those perceptions cannot be valid. Okay? And there are a lot of examples Prasangikas give. One is, seeing mirage as water. Right? Due to certain external conditions, we think there's a water, but it's a mirage. So that thing appears as water, but there is no water. Okay? So that perception is not valid perception because it's affected by external, those error conditions. Okay?
디다 죽발레게 통화좀뭐 나바니 엉보세 엉보경데 인지는 엉볼리 시도 로버도 사다도 디니 시도 자 로베고도 시다도 자 델 커사 데르와 커사 양다 군조세야 되다 로베고도 이시거와 어디게 통화좀뭐 나바니 데스다 데스거라 좀바세 통화좀뭐 나바니 엉보세다 엉보경데 노스 시도자 엉보세다 시도자 커사 데레 건지 택시 누가 맹게디가 그래서 범지 미긴도 자디니 있어지 누가 맹게디 싫어와 미기시던 나와니노서 다까지 트게 디가가 엉보 쫑된세 싫어와 어서 지대 장도 르시나 에니 지대 랑기 때 샤워 다 간지 어디 송지 미게디 잔디도 커사 양다 키바셰 그러와 미기신진다 있는 다진도 히바도 지대 랑을 야 로베 히바샤 그러와 세다 엉보체다 엉보 히드 존데 안제는 히와니 엉볼리기 히드 로번데 세라와다 테이시 레바텔라 있는 네바 메베 엉보 저저 되는 거 로베 군존도 그래서 저와 네바 메베 헤기 주기 네바 메베 히발라 때네 있는 콘서 테이기 주 레바 인자 있는 데려와 가서 로베 군존 인서 저와 지대랑 장도되다 지대랑 가지 요말 쓰고라 어디
So now Geshe is giving explanation on Chandrakirti's, a quote from Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way at the bottom of page 167. Also, perceivers of false states are of two types, those with clear sensory faculties and those with impaired sensory faculties. A consciousness with an impaired sensory faculty is considered wrong in relation to a consciousness with a good sensory faculty, and so on. Okay, now explanation given on that is even from worldly people's point of view, we can talk about what we call yangda, means maybe correct perceptions, and incorrect or false perceptions, if you will. The correct perceptions according to the world is like I can see that, I can see a vase there, right? Visual consciousness apprehending a vase is considered as correct perception because a vase exists and I can perceive that, isn't it? Or that I can talk about, I can hear sounds, properly. So those are considered as correct perceptions from worldly point of view. The incorrect perceptions, for lack of better words, the lokpa is the wrong perceptions, are just like we say, seeing two moons in the sky, okay? Or seeing the mirage as a water. These, even the worldly says, these are the wrong perceptions or incorrect perceptions, okay?
어디 근데 뭐 송하기 지대니 대 랑만 지대니 로반 남바 샤스다 거제 내가 택지 말레 바디 히바 유드제 바디 지대는 대바 샤그레스 지대는 거 다라 랑자 요레스 라고르 미주 콜리자 계자 요 말와 또 현다든 지대니 로반 남바 샤스 에네 미기 셔다 진제베 히바도 지대는 요 말스 그러와 지대는 로반 샤그레스와 디코에 또 벌도 말이 어디 샤스 제 타니베 히바 율 타니 가르사 제 타니베 히바 등 율라 타니베 히바니를 때디 신조로모 니유도 샤고스 데르다 텐조로라 이니 율라 양로니 유제라 양로니 샤고다 텐조 면시 런지부터게 율로 양로 샤고 유제 양다비 찬스거라 양로니 식 말이 어디게 자리 양로니 스도 그 양다군저다 로 여기 어디서 네 유진 로바 샤도 말아서 런지 면시 유진 그 양다비 히바이 미차스고 다 가지 로베군도 요말라고 그래 노서 텐지의 유진이가 샤라와 노서 어디게 자들
So basically, even from worldly point of view, the way we differentiate between correct perception and wrong perception is if your perception is affected by temporary conditioning factors, and then you could see mirage as water, or you might see two moons in the sky. So those perceptions are considered as incorrect or wrong perceptions. If your perception is not affected by those temporary conditioning factors, such as you see a vase, you hear sound, or things like that, then these are considered as correct perceptions. So this kind of distinction between correct perception and wrong perception that worldly people assert it does not have anything to do with, the idea of emptiness. We don't have to touch the idea of emptiness. We just simply, based on convention, say this is correct, this is incorrect. But we don't have to, with regard to emptiness, we don't talk that in a worldly sense. Okay, and then further, Geshe explains where it says here at the bottom of that quote. The rest are posited as unreal. Okay, that's explained. So Geshe further explained that according to Prasangika Madhyamikans, we can talk about correct and incorrect with regard to objects, with regard to subjective perceptions. Yul is the object, Yujin are the subjective perceptions. So they can say, we can talk about, correct or incorrect with regard to the objects and perceptions. But according to Sevatantrika Madhyamikan school below, they could only talk about correct and incorrect with regard to the objects, not the perceptions. Okay, why? Because they accept the intrinsic nature of things. So they can't talk about, incorrect, what called, I hope is the right word, incorrect, perceptions. So Geshe thought maybe we can stop there and welcome your questions. And there is the mic there. Let me write down the page number for next time.
So my question is, I think hopefully pretty simple. Is there a difference between all of our perceptions of people and things and our perceptions of ourselves in how we do this? So is there some difference, or do we just regard ourselves in the same way?
Okay, let me try to understand your question. So you said, is there a difference between how we perceive others and everything else and how we perceive ourselves? Is there a difference between, right? Okay. What I'm going to share the answer that can answer that the or Jigdenbegi that been again semantic to matter say your wage. Sidu kala nganju ngene ta mission the chue shen then but talk down your wage. Yet a so ya da talk down so much better. Dingy borolia and the talk really kebaris carry your yamars again. That mission ba that made chue shen the mission ba again nganju da lo talk to your wage. Did so not in some your talk down your wage. Just the talk to dingy borol sugar again. 다 콘셉트 왕식 독주인의 섬조와 디벌 독주인이 개발을 요말스게.
다 디피지고 only 들라고. 지단 신는데 미스에는 다 현다 돈는다. 소소도 그 범바도는 그 또야지 봐라. 다 그거 러디 너디 다 only 도는 그 유디 첸도 그 유디면은 또야 요말아. 다 똑바세야지. 그 첸 유디 뭐 티도 고 말아. 다다 소소롱반도부터 거징이만 통이고 간가 다다 첸놈을 요라와. 그 디제 케지 only 세야지. 인식 문제 유디 첸도 되면 요말. 똑바세야지 유디 첸고 말아. 뒤섬을 주어라. only 다다 이제 뭐 다다 그 가도 유디 뭐 주서 말아. 디제스 메로 다 거지.
Geshe says, maybe to perhaps answer that question, we maybe need to differentiate between perception in terms of two things. One is, sensory perceptions, and other is what we call maybe conceptual perception or thought processes. In terms of, sensory perceptions, for our sensory perceptions to perceive things, the objects and those perceptions must, come together, so to speak. They must have, see each other. That's why the sensory perceptions can see what is here and now. They can't see things, happen in the past or in the future. When the objects come into contact with perceptions, they perceive. In the case of what we call the conceptual perceptions, the objects don't have to exist here and now. That's why we can go back and think about what we did in the past or what we saw or what can happen in the future. And so it depends what kind of perception we're talking about, right? Are we talking about sensory perceptions of ourselves and others? Is there a difference? Or the conceptual perceptions of who we are and others? So on what level are you?
I'm talking about our perceptions of ourselves specifically.
So what kind of perception? Is that sensory perception or the conceptual thinking perception? What kind?
It can be both.
Okay. Right.
Who am I? Or it could be,
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Ngisigi da chana pena gengi this kana rwa wangshi ki tok su da tok be tok su kha rwa ge ka ri tol chiwa tang la yimba ge pena so tok da mi tok da la de chura wangshi ngen la ge tok be yu ngen shi la rwa ni ga ngen te ben dil chaba yung ko ba sa ge mi xian da chue xian rwa ge wangshi ki tok su yin de lu tok yu ki tok su yin de rwa de da so care di ane wangshi ki tok su da ka so da tok be tok su rwa ge ni bo lu chaba yo rwa so da ra sin
소소 랑 어시 동지다 또버 동지 쳐봐요 저와
na
더 미시가 또서는 다 진짜 미시가
man mi xian ngao pa tok du ga ge xian pa tok da she rwa
아 미시다 봐도
ngā rō jina ki shilōsa chūrim tōk zui dāda ngā rā tōk zui shio rō dīngi pōrō kheba yō rō sī rō
알레 데데다 페제 유소소소다 다 동지 쳐봐 이제 그 처만 줘서 쳐자요 말이야 소소 동나 처만 줘고 파 피겔 동나 처만 줘고 쳐자요 말이야
nō
다 육사진 다 가지고
Right.
데르 게 쳐자 말이야
sā. But in terms of, let's say, we talk about valid perceptions, whether it's self or others, Geshe said that should be same. Of course, the object's different. Other person may have different characteristics. You have different characteristics. Now, that level, there were differences. But in terms of, valid perception of self and others as a person, he thinks it should be same. Yeah. Do we have the? Okay. Yeah.
Dashi Deli. I'm thinking, can you hear me? I'm thinking
Yeah.
about the conceptual perceptions that we come to, we conclude about things like in meditation. Maybe we're thinking about emptiness. We're concluding things. And when do we know that that's valid?
Okay. Can you rephrase it one more time? I must have missed
I
something.
mean, when you think about things, the conceptual perception, when do we know that that's valid? We already know that when we see things and we hear in that, it's not exactly a valid
Okay.
perception. So, but we're thinking about this emptiness we want to know. We're thinking about what white Tara looks like. We're thinking about all these conceptions. How do we know that whenever that's valid? Because we are concluding.
Sure.
How do you, what do we use to get to the
Okay.
understanding of emptiness, if not
Thank
our
you.
thoughts?
Yeah. I understood your question. Kurang kandi shwe de dire do again.
맞아
Ta bana wangxe sama senga de chi chi de kala ta ko yu de che yu de kala ko kali na ga pumba do de samsa ko ha ko ro wa sa ge. Ta nga zo tok be gi chema sa jo ro wa ge. Tok yu li ya. Dan di chema yime de ga yu ro jan ka ha ko sa bana nga zo ro che ta tong ba ni che de ne ro wa. Tong ba ni li ya che ge tok ba jo ro wa. Ta da de che de na ya ma ma de ko chi bi ro wa ge. Ko chema di la ha ko ro wa ge. Di li ya bana chi ngone tong ni ram kong gu yo le de me be kan ju mo ju ro wa ge. Ko chema du gu yime de kan de che ko de tab che ka ro sa ge.
알레 됐어 다시도 또이 타비 가르 또야 타비 가르여서 계속 말이 당부 내말 들어서 각자 그것은 그러라와
No.
다 각자 그로 사당데 대다가 미칼시야 저보다 진짜 패도가 뭐다 배제는다 다 지금 최시디 시거를 배제나라 이어리 뒤에 강가 선물당 돈다 소수비게 용도 지는 그 랑팅 저서야서 다 차당 가려도 소수 냠용거 들어와
No.
냠용거 등어 약보 신선나 근데 다 뒤인도부터 따라와다 그 위에는 다 풍부한가 야면 로스요 그 야면 찍도 주고 거기 가르지 뭐지 지금 위에는 다 찍다데 가르면 차로
No.
좋아
No.
저 다 근데 찍다데 가면 매 차로
No.
저 당보데 가자 등어서네 근데 그 기제 거 매번 가자 야보 고마서나 하잖아 이제 따라와 지야 믿으세요 샤로라
No.
그래서 가자 등어서야 디 개체키다 가자 야보 고서는 또 더워
No.
가자 야보 고는 야는 세달 두고 버리 야만 딱다 같이 타니를 후야 뭐 야마다 가자 야보 무슨 소도 없나
No.
그러와 단다다 먼저 저 하상신의 세달 송로와
No.
다 먼저 랑데 세달 랑주 미지 강가 때는 야 딱다 송도여와 랑고 저고 있어와
No.
어 진짜지라와 다 뒤에 따와 소소 냠미도 타야지야고 이지 세워 셰다 이다요 와라 무슨 좀 셔럽 파우지라와
Well, the first thing I want to say is, when we're dealing with, it's a very important question, like, when we're dealing at a conceptual level about a phenomenon, the example you gave is emptiness, how do we know, right? We are really actually analyzing emptiness or validly doing that, First thing is, emptiness is really a very tough topic. That's why it says it is beyond expression, beyond thought, right? All of those things. It is one of those phenomena, very hard to. The only way we can do is based upon authentic explanation. Once we have really understood it, then we should go back and try to check with our own everyday experiences, okay, see if we can verify with that. And with emptiness, Geshe said, as he said some other day, it all starts with precisely understanding and identifying what is negated, the object of negation, what doesn't exist really, okay? So once we understand what is intrinsic existence, what it really means, right? I mean, it's not enough to understand it in intellectual level based upon the teaching or reading books or things like that. Now we really have to try to, relate it to our personal life, experience, see how do we really perceive the things? How do things appear to our perceptions, right? And so we have to really check with our own experiences. So somewhere we can connect it with our daily experiences. We say, oh, this is what intrinsic existence means. And then we can analyze whether phenomena exist intrinsically or not. Yeah? We can do all kinds of rational analysis, and one of which is we say, if something exists, it must exist as a single phenomenon or entity, or it must exist as multiple phenomena, isn't it? That's the only two ways to exist, two possibilities exist. If something exists, it should be a single, it should be multiple phenomena. Okay? So we say, if self exists intrinsically, we know what intrinsic existence means, then either it has to exist as identical with our aggregates, right? That means one with, or it should exist as separate from, distinct from our aggregates. So those are the only two possibilities. So we analyze rational analysis. So at the end, when we don't find it exists in any of those ways, so that is coming to understand emptiness, at least intellectually. So that it all starts with precise understanding of intrinsic existence, the object of negation, and then being able to connect it with our everyday experience. Okay, so then we know we are in a valid, conceptually validly engaged in that topic. Otherwise, we could fall into the traps that we are talking about. Right? The whole point of talking about Hoshang is not so much talking about Hoshang, but we might end up, we might assert, yes, things don't exist intrinsically, but in reality, from our experience point of view, we might end up being Hoshang, because if we, if we refute the existence of everything, that is a Hoshang's position, isn't it? We say ultimately nothing exists. Doesn't matter. Do whatever you please it, because really nothing exists at all. So extreme of nihilism. Or we might end up asserting somehow that things have some intrinsic nature, just like the Sevatandika Madhyamikans and school below, they have fallen on the extreme of eternalism. So we get caught up in either of these two extremes, which means we have missed the point. So it's very important for us to precisely understand and identify intrinsic existence.
Rồi gacha ngoma je toyo to apen leji rabji tsa wala leji ngoma je na tsa ya wara ode ji ko ji ya da ta leji ngoma je na me bumda ye na ko se che to ro a ngoma je me chap ji mi ni so ji me na leji ka ya ko ngara se da yi mi ji gacha ngoma zo na ene san toyi to ya ma da toyi to khak bo se ya di gacha ngoma sumo do re se do a se gacha ngoma sin san de toyi to ya de ka le khabo le be im da yo mar singu do a.
So, that is the crux of the matter in terms of dealing with emptiness validly. We have to precisely identify intrinsic existence. What does it mean? Okay? If we miss that point, regardless of what kind of analysis we do, we might end up in one of those two extremes, and we're going to miss the whole point. Okay? Ordinarily speaking, if we are, looking for a person, X, Y, Z, if we have the identity, complete identity precise under that person, then it's easier to in search of that person, right? We can go and find him or her among like thousands of people. But if we don't have the clear identity of that person, we could be sitting next to that person and be like, okay, who is he or she, right? Even among few people, we can't find that person. So just like that, precise identification of the object of negation is essential, crucial to understand emptiness. Once we know that, emptiness is really not difficult to understand. This is our difficulty challenge, how to precisely identify the object of negation. Once you do that, it's easy to understand emptiness.
First of all, it seems to me that this cannot be. It just said Huashang maintains that nothing exists, therefore do everything. That this really cannot be. It has to be stated. That cannot be his position because he has a path. Somebody who has a path obviously cannot claim do whatever you want, nothing exists. Furthermore, he says that everything exists for deceptive consciousness, which is exactly what today was identified as the position of Prasangika Madhyamika. So he's really squarely in that camp. So that's the first point. Maybe Geshe I can comment on that. But the whole teaching really it's totally fantastical. It's almost bizarre. What we're hearing today, it's very difficult to comprehend. Maybe I'm missing some very important point. But for example, going back to this quote from Chandrakirti's commentary.
Where are you on page?
167.
Okay.
He calls perceivers of falsities. So the conventional consciousnesses, he identifies them as perceivers of falsities. So we're saying all along we've been saying that they're valid, and at the same time they're perceivers of falsities. Now you meant that obviously you commented on that, Geshe, but nevertheless this is really strange. To say that something is mistaken, it's a mistaken awareness because it's mistaken with regard to its appearing object. At the same time, it's valid. Really, we have to kind of squarely see the fact that this is very bizarre.
Okay.
And I mean, I would like Geshe.
So okay, let me try to answer. That's important. We said, we are saying that a perception can be valid with regard to its object, but it is mistaken with regard to the appearance, or the way it appears. So that is really kind of weird. That's what you said, right?
Its appearing object is mistaken. So the consciousness are both mistaken awarenesses and valid cognitions. That is very strange. I would ask Geshe, for example, if you could direct his attention to the cup there and tell us exactly what part of it is the intrinsic existence that's mistaken, the appearance, and what part is truly existent. If he has a marker, maybe he can circle around so that we know what to negate exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Prasangi.
The Quran again, the Kanged di Sadesam Gudu. Then the Karaso 경아적 디 군접세셔로 와게 다들 베지 인진하는 게 딱다치 마데면 강에 메러스 무드로 와 직지여로 와 양다도 로베 군접세셔로 베나게 디시고로 와 다들 인가 주스도 갈 직된 베기 안에 가서 오르베나 왕샬로 소바되게 디 고체마 인속을 해서 와게 단낭유로 고 템버도 나베 차를 트위데여로 마드로 와게 그래서라 저도 고 디코 구구에서 말로 와게 고 유리야 차마 인접발라 고 나유를 트위데나 다 디도 깨자 kenza 시르도 서와게 저도 당에서 마디 고 로리기 고함에 지기지로 와게 저디 대셔 집에나 맞아 잘라 샤베나 와게 누구를 숙사이나 그래 딜이야 딱다 대라 대처를 트위데여로 서와게 이래를 지기 야와를 채토여로 서와게 누구든 잘라를 지내러와게
레레 다 틀에 지당이 단다 남제 값이나 돼야다 엉키세야데 실질 트는 저 탐지 추고 그랬으니까 남제 로르다
그래서
실질을 맞은 다 가지는요 배는 시 가지 맞을 저 탐지 추고 말했을 때 현재 남제 코로나 로르시니 해다니야래
그래서
가르서는 대세가다 pero 돈가로 나게겠다 미치죠 말에 가서 서버스라다 돈가로 나는데 따다리오라 어디 돈가로 나게 될 애네 그 카도로 추스 예벌 모두 생기죠라 어디 생기죠다 그래서 돈가 서버 나나 그 나자 서버 나나 소다도 저런자 되고라 어디 생기지다야 어디서야 그 미기양 샤인자 초직는 강가 추구를 생기지 카니여라 당한지 단다 남들 가서 피지 어이 초직는 강가 추구를 담아기 다 대교때 가가 되고 말에 대교로 고 말아 샤말이나 세말 주기 하고 말아 어이도 주기 다 되다 치료도는 어디 다 무슨라 내려와 너대바 남들 로시나 에네 세마 마주고 거다 그래서 어이 어무 세마 내려다 어쩌다 디디다 간지 다 히디자 어이 쇼직 쓰는 강가 추도 그랬어요 뭐도요 เป็น동가서보다 어이데 먼저는 로히인라고 하다 그죠 신문에 신고 예 추요 말아 어디 먼저다 세메 남지 그게 다 헤드르시나 인디 로기 있고 아니 동가 예브 세마 많이 쓰고 다 카도 튀어라 카도 튀어서 거다 히드 보라 튀자리 거 세마 많이 쓰고
자기 안주 순대 수육 쓰고 당아도 시
먼저 세다 들어다 다 남지 다 남려로 다 geluk 쓰고 말해 저바시야 로지어라 어딜다 다 보일 타야 돼 자갈 다 니요 다 그지 다 보일지도 단단 건서 뒤시도 다 지금 가자 투비 참말 투비도 차니 하고 말이 가지 저와 동세버 넘게 될거 투시 뭐도지 그 예불 뭐도 예불 참만 있어야 계속 요 말다 그 로기랑 하고
디치도 갈게 단다 그즈도 갈다 왕셰디 담바르베나라 추이데 갈라든 추셰 차되고 말다
투시 넘버도
말아주 세다
그런 신도 다 대교를 신는데 투시 하고 대교 투시다 유들 추와 재미기 기도하고라
추셰의 세만 이시데
유직을다
아네
유직을 세마다 이 투시 기도하고 본발 투야지 본발 세마 이 범심게 되셔고라 다 로지 미제들 본발 투선 처음에 차다 거기 지도 그 본발 본수도 봐 투디 본발 투스가 말이 그 동이 돈을 투스고라 대교 유직을 추와다 재미기 되셔고라 되게 되다 패시 로릭다 되게 메다 라트 하고 그러지
Yeah, Geshe says, where maybe, I mean, part of that, I think, that's my translator's note, okay, maybe it's the challenge in English translation to translate some of those terminology called, maybe sometimes people say falsity, some says deceptive, some says invalid, right? So that could be our, issue here. But part of that, Geshe said, because in order to understand some of these things, I mean, it's very complex, we have to have a really good understanding of what we call logic, the science of mind, the differentiations, the perceptions, things like that, and especially from different schools of thought. He said in the Pramana Vartika, the valid cognition text, there are different positions being made, as a matter of fact. One of the things they said, somebody would say that if a perception is mistaken with regard to certain aspect of an object, okay, then they say that perception has to be completely invalid and mistaken perception. Others said, no, a perception can be mistaken with regard to aspect of a phenomenon, object, but it could still be valid with regard to that phenomenon. So in the Pramana Vartika, people make different assertions. But according to the sort of the Gelugpa system of debate, they assert that if a perception is mistaken with regard to a certain aspect of the phenomenon, then that perception is taken as mistaken perception, the whole thing. On the other side, they said, look, if we see the white conch shell as yellow, let's say an eye perception, they said that, yes, with regard to the color, it is mistaken because the white is not yellow, so that is mistaken. But with regard to what the conch is, the shape and the form, still you perceive correctly. So they said that it is possible to assert that a perception is mistaken with regard to a certain form, like the color, but it's still valid with regard to the form. Okay, that's one perspective. But according to the Gelugpa's debate on this issue, is if something is mistaken to an aspect of a thing, then it's mistaken. Therefore, they consider perception that sees white conch as yellow is considered as a wrong perception, lokshe. The whole thing is considered. So there are different positions being made with regard to that. And also, in terms of what is considered as valid or not, I think the Prasangikas and the other schools of thought have a very big way of understanding it, which I think complicates the matter further. What is it? Let me try to get it right.
유직되다. 지당 추고 뭐다. 본발도 찍을 추네. 본발 세마이 본발 중에 세워라. 또 로지 메지도 본발 세마이는 본발 머리 차지. 본주도 봐 추시래 본발 추려고 말이야.
Right. So this is I think the difficulty we have. As we say, Geshe advises only when we study thoroughly the science of the mind, we might know this. According to Prasangika Madhyamikans, they assert that a perception can be both valid and invalid with regard to, the same phenomenon. He said, that's a challenge. How can a perception be valid and invalid with regard to the same phenomenon? According to other schools of thought, like Sarvatanga Madhyamika below, they said if something is valid to an object, it cannot be invalid. Or if it's invalid, it cannot be valid. So those are the different types of perception, categorizations and definitions we need to explore more. Okay.
say then that all our perceptions are mistaken awarenesses, all of them? There is nothing that's unmistaken. Would you
Okay.
say that?
Right. Ta pian di shen ge ngara zu ge da nam ju ji ge da wang shen ne ka ta da jo lo wa ge. Ti ge